Stop. Right there. Line 47. The room went silent. Not because a lawyer said it, not because a partner said it, because the cook said it, a woman who had spent 6 years bringing coffee to men in suits, and she was pointing at a contract worth $300 million 1 second before the most dangerous man in the room pressed his pen to the signature line. Serafina Romano looked at where the woman's finger landed. And every single thing she thought she understood about this case, about this company, about the man she thought she knew collapsed. Subscribe. Drop your city below. Find out how far this story goes. 6 hours earlier, Serafina Romano had walked back through the glass doors of Mercer and Brewer like a woman returning to the scene of a crime, because that is precisely what it was. She didn't knock. She never knocked anymore. She had spent 2 years learning not to knock. She pressed both palms flat against the glass and pushed, and every head in that room turned, and every jaw went still, and Robert Brewer, the man who had signed her termination letter, on a Tuesday afternoon while she stood there holding a box of her own belongings, went the color of old concrete. "Good morning," Serafina said. Her voice didn't shake. Not one syllable. Brewer stood slowly like a man trying to decide whether he was in danger. "Serafina, nobody told me you were—" "Nobody needed to tell you," she said. "That's the point." She walked to the head of the table. She pulled out the chair. She sat down, not fast, not aggressive, just inevitable the way water fills a space, and she set a single manila folder on the mahogany surface between them. Gerald Mott, the managing partner, cleared his throat. He was the kind of man who filled silence with throat clearing the way lesser men filled it with words. "This is highly irregular." "What's irregular," Serafina said, "is that this firm has been operating under a billing structure for 9 years that your most loyal clients have never been told about." She opened the folder. She slid one page to the center of the table. "What is not irregular, Gerald, is that I now represent the entity that controls 7 of your 10 largest corporate accounts. So irregular or not, you're going to sit there and you're going to listen." The room held its breath. Brewer's eyes went to the document. His jaw tightened. "That's a letter from Koss Enterprises." "It is." "You're working for Aurelio Koslov." "I'm general counsel for Koss Enterprises." "Yes." Something moved behind Brewer's eyes, something fast and cold, the kind of calculation that happened in the space between heartbeats. "Koslov sent you here." "Nobody sent me anywhere, Robert." She leaned forward slightly. "I came because I chose to. Because Koss Enterprises requires legal clarity on several matters that originate in decisions made at this table. And because," she paused just long enough, "I have waited 2 years to sit in this chair." Callum Rhodes was the youngest partner in the room. 29. She had mentored him for 18 months before they threw her out. She had taught him how to read a deposition, how to structure a brief, how to handle a client who was lying to their own attorney. He hadn't said a single word during her termination. She had thought about that silence more times than she wanted to count. She looked at him now directly, and he looked back at her with an expression she recognized, the face of a person who has lived 2 years inside a decision they cannot undo. "Callum," she said. He straightened. "Yes. The Hendricks account. You managed it after I left." A beat. "I did. Did anyone tell you what the billing discrepancy was?" His mouth opened, closed. "I was told it had been resolved." "Resolved," she repeated. "Did you ask how?" Silence. "The most damning kind. $412,000, Serafina said to the room at large. "That's what was overbilled to the Hendricks estate over 7 years. George Hendricks died not knowing. His widow called me, not this firm, me, because I was the only attorney who ever called her back 3 months after my termination. She had received no refund, no explanation, no acknowledgement." She looked at Brewer. "She's 71 years old, Robert. She trusted you people with everything her husband left her." "That matter," Brewer said tightly, "is under internal review." It was under internal review. It is now under Bar Association review. And as of last week, it is also under the attention of the District Attorney's Financial Crimes Unit. She closed the folder. "I didn't file those complaints last week. I filed them 14 months ago. They take time. They're taking less time now." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every calculation. Every person at that table was running simultaneously. Gerald Mott set down his pen. The sound of it hitting the table was absurdly loud. What do you want, he said, not what are your terms, not what does your client require, just what do you want? The honest question, the one that meant he understood. Monday, Serafina said, the full refund to Margaret Hendricks, principal interest, and a written apology on firm letterhead. She stood, and I want it delivered in person, by someone at this table. She looked at Callum again. By someone who actually feels something about what was done. Callum looked like she had put a hand directly on a wound. Good. She needed him to feel it, because she was going to need him later, and she needed him ready. The elevator down was where her hands began to tremble. Not fear, never fear anymore. Something older and more complicated, the specific exhaustion of holding your spine absolutely straight in front of people who once watched you break and making sure they never ever saw the cost. Her phone buzzed before she reached the lobby. How did it go, Aurelio? She typed back without stopping walking. They'll comply. His response, I never had a single doubt. Are you okay? She stared at those 4 words longer than was probably wise for a woman crossing a lobby in heels. I will be, she typed. 1 hour. Aurelio Kozlov had known Serafina Romano for exactly 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. She knew this not because she was sentimental, but because she was a lawyer, and lawyers track time the way other people tracked weather, as a matter of professional survival. He had hired her after watching her spend 4 hours in a deposition, systematically destroying testimony that 2 senior partners had called bulletproof. He had sat across the room and thought with the particular clarity that sometimes visited him during other people's finest moments. I need that woman on my side, whatever it takes. It had taken 3 months to convince her. Another 4 weeks for her to stop flinching every time a senior partner raised their voice in a meeting, not because she was fragile, but because she had been conditioned, and conditioning takes time to unlearn. He was waiting for her in the Cause Enterprises lobby when she arrived. He looked at her face and said nothing for a moment, which was one of the things she had learned to value about him. The man understood when words were insufficient. Brewer, he said finally. Cornered, she said. Not finished. Difference matters. I know the difference. He fell into step beside her. Webb called me this morning. She stopped walking. Marcus Webb. He said he needs to meet, that it's urgent. Aurelio kept his voice level. He used the word urgent 4 times in a 90-second voicemail. What did you tell him? I didn't call back. She studied him. You need to tell me everything about Marcus Webb, starting from the beginning. I know. Aurelio. She kept her voice quiet. The quieter her voice, the more seriously people took what came next. She had learned that early. I am walking through your company's history with a flashlight, and I keep finding rooms I didn't know existed. I can't do this job if there are locked doors. He met her eyes. There are no locked doors. Then why does it feel like there are? He didn't answer immediately. That pause, that half second of something that might have been hesitation, was the first small fracture in the morning. She filed it away the way she filed everything quietly, precisely for later. Calm. Her office was smaller than anyone thought appropriate for her title. She had asked for it that way. A small room with a door she could close was worth more to her than a corner suite that announced itself. She closed the door now. She sat. She pressed her palms flat against the desk, the same gesture she had used against the glass doors at Brewer's office. The private ritual of reminding herself, floor is real, desk is real, you are real, you are here. On her screen, 4 emails. 3 were routine. The 4th had no sender name, just an address, a string of random characters that would route to nothing if you tried to reply. Subject line, you should stop now while you still can. She read it twice. Then she forwarded it to Aurelio. See this. His reply came in under a minute, already on it. Security team flagged it. Do not respond. She had no intention of responding. But she looked at it for 30 more seconds because she had learned in the months after the termination and the long, ugly work of rebuilding that threats announced themselves in 2 registers. Loud threats full of noise and vague menace from people who were performing danger. And quiet threats. Specific ones. The ones that said, stop now while you can without explaining what can meant or what now was measuring against. The quiet threats came from people who were genuinely afraid of what you might find. She almost smiled. Marcus Webb arrived the next morning without an appointment. Priya, her assistant, 24 years old, and possessed of the most precisely calibrated social radar Serafina had ever encountered in an office setting, appeared in the doorway at 9:12 with an expression that communicated everything before she said a word. Marcus Webb is in reception, Priya said. He told me he'd wait. He's been here 50 minutes. 50 minutes, Serafina repeated. He brought coffee. For himself, didn't offer me any. Serafina set down her pen. I'll handle it. Webb was seated with his legs crossed when she walked out, performing the kind of studied ease that was itself a tell. Relaxed people don't perform relaxation. He looked up when she appeared, and she watched his face move through 3 expressions in under 2 seconds. Surprise, then the particular dismissal that certain men applied automatically to women they hadn't scheduled, then a careful recalibration as he registered her posture, her stillness, the fact that she had not smiled. You must be the new counsel, he said. New counsel. Like she was a temp. General counsel, she said. Serafina Romano, we haven't met. He stood, extended a hand. She shook it, firm brief, releasing first. I've heard your name, he said. I've heard your, I heard, she said. Sit down, Marcus. Something shifted in his eyes. He had expected her to escort him to a waiting area, offer him Aurelio's assistance number, perform the small theater of corporate gatekeeping. He had not expected to be told to sit down by someone who made it sound like a decision she had already made. He sat. She sat across from him. Not beside him, across. Aurelio isn't available today, she said. I'm aware of his schedule. Are you? Not a question, a beat. I've known Aurelio for 20 years. I know your history, she said, which is why I'll skip the part where you tell it to me and get to the part where you tell me what you actually need. Webb looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize as the moment a certain kind of man decides whether a woman is worth being honest with. It was not a flattering expression to witness, but she had stopped being bothered by it because the ones who decided yes were almost always the ones who were genuinely afraid and afraid people told you things. I need to talk to Aurelio about my stake, he said. Your former stake. About the possibility of re-entering. That decision goes through legal counsel. She held his gaze. Through me, which means if you want that conversation, you schedule it through my office, in writing, with your current representation present. His jaw tightened, a micro-expression gone in a fraction of a second. This is a personal matter between. There are no personal matters when it comes to ownership stakes in a company I represent, she said. Put it in writing. My office will respond within 10 business days. He picked up his jacket. Slow, deliberate, a man reasserting control of his own timeline. Tell Aurelio I came by. It'll be in my notes, she said. She watched him go. She waited until the elevator closed. Then she turned to Priya. Pull everything we have on Marcus Webb. Partnership dissolution records the buyout structure, every communication between him and Aurelio going back 10 years. Priya already had her tablet out. Should I flag anything specific? Flag everything that looks like it was buried. She called Aurelio at noon. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he had been expecting her. Webb came by, she said. I know, Priya texted me. You want to tell me what's actually going on? A pause, the wrong kind of pause, not the pause of a man thinking, the pause of a man deciding how much to say. There are things about Marcus's departure from COS, he said carefully, that I haven't fully explained. Aurelio. One word. Flat. He wasn't just bought out, Aurelio said. He was removed, quietly, because we discovered that a billing model he had developed internally for our logistics contracts had been structured in a way that was at minimum ethically compromised, and possibly the criminal. She sat very still. This billing model, she said, describe it. Layered fee structures, built into the contract language so specifically that a standard review wouldn't catch them. Charges that compounded over time buried in renewal clauses. Like what was done at Mercer and Brewer, she said. Yes. One word, all the air in the room rearranged itself. You knew, she said slowly. You knew when you hired me, when you pointed me at those Mercer and Brewer contracts, that what I would find there connected back here. To Marcus. I suspected. How long have you known? 6 weeks. She put her hand flat on the desk, not trembling, just present, grounding herself against the wave of something that was equal parts fury and something she hadn't felt since the morning they had walked her out of Brewer's office, the sickening vertigo of realizing that the people standing beside you are not standing where you thought they were. 6 weeks, she said. Her voice was entirely calm. That was the most dangerous version of her voice, and she knew it, and he almost certainly knew it. Serafina, I need every document connected to Marcus Webb's internal billing work at COS on my desk by Monday. Everything. Not filtered, not reviewed first. Everything. She paused. And Aurelio, if I find that there's another 6-week lag on something else, our professional relationship has a serious problem. Silence. Understood, he said quietly. She hung up. She looked at the yellow legal pad in front of her. She drew a long horizontal line. On the left end, she wrote, "What I know." On the right, "What I don't know yet." She stared at the space between. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Romano. Male, older, measured. The voice of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say and still wasn't sure they should say it. I don't have much time. You need to find a document in the COS archives called the Meridian Protocol. It's 11 years old. It's been untouched. Marcus Webb wrote it, and it's the reason he's trying to get back inside that company. Who is this? Someone who knows what was signed, the voice said, and what was hidden inside what was signed. A breath. Look at the document, Ms. Romano, and then look very carefully at who else's name is on it. The line went dead. She set the phone down. She wrote 2 words at the bottom of the yellow legal pad. Meridian Protocol. She circled them once, then she circled them again. Then she picked up her phone and called Priya. I need you to access the COS archive system, she said. 11 years back, I'm looking for an internal document called the Meridian Protocol. A pause. Keyboard sounds. Ms. Romano, Priya said slowly. What? I'm in the archive index. I can see the file. Another pause. It's flagged as restricted. The restriction was placed 6 weeks ago. A final pause. By Mr. Koslov. Serafina closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them. Get me that file, she said, whatever clearance level it takes. And she began to understand with the slow, terrible clarity of someone whose flashlight had just found the largest room in the building that she was not untangling someone else's mess. She was standing in the middle of it. Priya got her the file in 19 minutes. Serafina didn't ask how. There were things a good assistant did that a good attorney didn't need to know the precise mechanics of, and accessing a restricted internal archive at the request of the company's general counsel was almost certainly within the bounds of defensible professional judgment. Almost certainly. She opened the file at her desk. Lone. Door closed. The Meridian Protocol was 43 pages long. It was dated 11 years ago. March formatted like a standard internal operating agreement, the kind of document that lived in corporate archives for decades without anyone reading it, because it looked on the surface exactly like everything else. Dry language, clause numbers, defined terms in bold, the specific camouflage of bureaucratic tedium. Serafina had spent her entire career learning to read documents that were designed not to be read. She started on page 1 and did not stop. By page 8, her pen was moving. By page 14, she had filled 2 pages of her legal pad. By page 21, she stopped. She set the pen down. She read 1 paragraph 3 times. Then she stood up, walked to her window, and stood there for a full minute without moving. Then she picked up her phone and called Aurelio. He answered on the second ring. I was going to call you, page 21, she said. Section 7C, the indemnification clause. Silence. You've read it, she said. Morafina. The indemnification clause names 3 parties, she said. COS Enterprises, Marcus Webb. She paused. And Mercer and Brewer. Her voice was still even, still controlled. Robert Brewer co-signed this document 11 years ago, Aurelio. His firm is structurally indemnified against any legal liability arising from the billing model Marcus developed. That's why the bar complaint has moved slowly. That's why the DA's office kept hitting walls. The liability was contractually rerouted before anyone knew there was a problem to root. She pressed her hand to the glass. This is not a billing scandal. This is a conspiracy with a legal architecture built to survive exactly the kind of investigation I've been running. Aurelio said nothing for 4 seconds. 5. 6. I know, he said. She turned from the window. What do you mean you know? I mean, I know I found it 8 months ago, a reference to it buried in a footnote in our compliance audit. It took me 6 weeks to get the actual document, and when I got it, he stopped, started again. When I got it, I didn't know who I could trust to hand it to, because anyone who had been at COS longer than 7 years had the potential to be connected to what's in those pages. So you hired me? Yes. Someone brand new, someone with no ties to COS, no ties to Web, no history with any of this. Someone who had already proven she was willing to go after Brewer specifically. A pause. Yes. Serafina sat back down at her desk. She looked at the document in front of her. She looked at the legal pad covered in her own handwriting. She looked at the two circled words at the bottom, Meridian Protocol. You used me, she said. I hired you, he said. There's a difference. Is there? Again, not a question. Serafina. His voice shifted lower, stripped of the careful professional register. He usually maintains something more direct underneath it. I hired you because you are the best person I have ever watched work. And because I knew that whatever was in that document, whatever it connected to, I needed someone who could not be intimidated and could not be bought and could not be scared off. Someone who had already survived the worst these people could do. A beat. I'm not sorry I hired you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything from the beginning. She was quiet for a moment. There's a fourth name, she said. What, page 38? The signature block. She pulled the document close. There are 4 signatures: Aurelio, Webb, Brewer, COS Enterprises, signed by you. She looked at the 4th line, and someone whose name I don't recognize. A man named Victor Lane. She looked up even though he couldn't see her. Who was Victor Lane? The silence this time was longer than any silence that had come before it. That, Aurelio said quietly, is what I've been trying to figure out for 8 months. She pressed her eyes shut for exactly 2 seconds. You're telling me there's a 4th party to this agreement and you don't know who he is? I know what he is, Aurelio said. I just don't know the full shape of it yet. Victor Laning is a name that appears in 3 separate places in our history. The Meridian Protocol, a logistics contract from 8 years ago that I now believe was fraudulent, and a wire transfer, a very large wire transfer that left a COS account the same week Marcus Webb was removed from the company. How large? $14 million. The number landed in the room like something physical. 14 million, she said, to an offshore account that has been professionally untraceable for 3 years. He said, I've had people trying. The account is clean, or it was. What do you mean was? I mean that 2 days ago a transaction moved through it for the first time in 3 years. His voice was very careful now, which means someone activated it, which means Victor Lane or whoever controls that account is not finished. Serafina looked at the signature on page 38. The handwriting was precise, controlled the signature of a man who signed things with intention. Marcus came here yesterday, she said slowly, because someone told him to, because the account moved, because something in this whole structure is being reactivated, and he's either trying to protect himself or trying to get ahead of it. She was thinking out loud now the way she only did when the architecture of a problem was finally revealing its shape. He wanted to be inside COS when whatever's coming comes. Yes, Aurelio said. That's what I believe. Then we need Victor Quan before he needs us, she said. Whatever it takes. And Aurelio, she let the pause do its work. From this moment, nothing moves in this investigation without me knowing first. Not a meeting, not a phone call, not a decision, nothing. Agreed, Bayu. I mean it. I know you do, he said. That's why I hired you. She hung up. She looked at the document. She looked at the 4th signature. Victor Lane. 2 words with the specific gravity of something that had been waiting to be found. She added the name to her legal pad. She drew a line from it to Marcus Webb, another line to Brewer, another to the $14 million wire. She stared at the shape it made. Then her office door opened without a knock. She looked up sharply. It was Callum. Callum Rhodes from Mercer and Brewer, who had watched them push her out 2 years ago and had said nothing, who had stood into the conference room that morning looking like a man living inside a decision he couldn't undo. He was standing in her doorway now in a coat that meant he had come straight from the street, face flushed, breathing slightly faster than normal. How did you get up here? She said. I told reception I had a meeting with you. You don't have a meeting with me. I know. When he stepped inside, he did not sit. Serafina, I need to talk to you. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to the door, not to throw him out, but to close it. Sit down, she said. He sat. He put both hands on his knees, a gesture she recognized from depositions, the body language of a person about to say something they've been holding for a long time and are terrified to release. The Hendricks account, he said, I knew. I knew before you left. She kept her expression entirely still. What did you know? I knew the billing numbers were wrong, not the full scope. I didn't know it was 400,000. I thought it was a rounding issue, something small. He stopped. That's not true, he said. I thought it was bigger than a rounding issue, and I told myself I didn't know what it was, which is a different thing from actually not knowing. Yes, she said, it is. And when they put you on the performance improvement plan, his voice cracked slightly at the edges. He controlled it. I knew it was connected. I knew they were trying to bury what you'd found by burying you. And I said nothing because I was 27 years old and I had $200,000 in student debt, and I was terrified. She looked at him. She let the silence be what it was. I'm not here for absolution, he said quickly. I know I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm here because this morning after you left, Brewer called a meeting. Just the senior partners. And I wasn't invited, which means they didn't think I'd be a problem. He leaned forward. Which means they don't know I'm here. She was very still now. What happened in that meeting? I don't know everything, but his assistant, she's been there 12 years. She hates him. She told me. He stopped, recalibrated. Brewer made 2 calls from the conference room after you left. One to someone she did not recognize, and one to a man named Lane. The name hit the room like a stone hitting still water. Victor Lane, Serafina said. Callum's eyes went wide. You know that name. Tell me exactly what the assistant said. She said she only caught pieces, but she heard Brewer say she has the protocol. We need to move before she understands what it means. Callum looked at her steadily, and then she heard him say, tell Lane it's time. The sentence arrived and the room contracted. Tell Lane it's time. Serafina stood. She walked to her desk, picked up the Meridian Protocol and held it. 43 pages, 11 years of architecture designed to redirect liability, obscure money, protect 4 men from consequences. She had been holding it for less than 2 hours and they already knew. They have someone here, she said, not to Callum, to herself, then sharper. In this building, someone told them I accessed the file. Whereas Callum said nothing because there was nothing to say that would make that better. She picked up her phone, called Priya. Who else has access to my document request logs? A pause. Keyboard. Your request should only be visible to IT and to a longer pause. Ms. Romano, there's a secondary access flag on your archive request from this morning. Someone with administrator credentials pulled your request log 40 minutes after you accessed the file. Who? The credentials belong to a consultant account. It's listed as, Priya's voice went very careful. It's listed under a firm called LMV Advisory Group. Serafina looked at Callum. LMV, she said. He shook his head slowly. I don't recognize it. Lane, she said. L, the M, the V. She set the document down. Victor Lane runs a consulting firm with his own initials, and that consulting firm has administrator-level access to Cost Enterprises' internal systems. She said it quietly the way you said things that were almost too clean to be coincidence. He's been inside the system the whole time, watching. He's not a ghost. He's embedded. The office door opened again. This time it was Aurelio, and the expression on his face told her he'd already heard. Priya called me, he said. He looked at Callum. The question on his face was clear. He's with us, Serafina said. Sit down, both of you. We have a very specific problem in a very short window. They sat. Victor Lane has eyes inside COS, she said. He knows I have the protocol. Brewer has already contacted him and told him to move. We don't know what move means yet, but we know it's timed. She looked at Aurelio. The offshore account activated 2 days ago. Brewer made the call this morning. These things are not unconnected. You think Laney is about to pull money, Aurelio said, or cover tracks, or both. She pressed her palm flat on the desk. What assets does Koss have that Lane could reach through his administrator access? Aurelio's face went through something that she did not like watching. Theoretically, vendor payment systems. If he has admin credentials deep enough, he could authorize outgoing payments. How much? He looked at her. Depending on the authorization tier, potentially significant. Aurelio, how much? If he reached the highest tier, 40, maybe 50 million in liquid accounts. The number sat on the table between all three of them. Callum made a sound that was not quite a word. We need to cut the access, Serafina said. Right now, every administrator credential connected to LMV advisory gets revoked in the next 10 minutes. IT, now no explanation given to anyone until I authorize it. Can you do that? Aurelio had his phone out before she finished the sentence. While he made the call, she looked at Callum. The assistant at Brewer's firm. Is she willing to talk? She's furious, he said. She's been furious for years. She has a file. A file? Her words. She said she has a file that she's been keeping since 2019. Things she overheard, dates, names, numbers. He met her eyes. She's been waiting for someone to ask. Serafina felt something that was almost physical, the specific sensation of a case that had been running underground for years, suddenly breaking into the open air all at once, too fast to manage without complete focus. I need her name, she said, and I need to talk to her today, not tomorrow. Today. Callum nodded. Done, Aurelio said, lowering his phone. LMV credentials are revoked system-wide as of 4 minutes ago. IT flagged 17 access events connected to that account in the past 6 months. He looked at her. 17 times Serafina. He's been reading everything. Then he knows more about what we know than we realize, she said, which means we stop putting anything in writing that we're not prepared to have him read. She picked up the Meridian protocol. And this goes somewhere physically secure, not digital, paper. She handed it to Callum. Take it to your car. Don't bring it back to this building. Don't make copies digitally. She held his gaze. You're in this now. That means I need to be able to trust you completely or not at all. Which is it? He looked at the document in his hands. He looked at her, and something settled in his face, not certainty, but commitment, which was more useful. All the way, he said. Then go, and call me the moment you're in your car. He left. Aurelio watched him go, then looked at her. Do you trust him? I trust that he's been living with guilt for 2 years and he's ready to do something about it, she said. That's a specific kind of reliable. He won't run. He has nowhere left to run to. She moved to her coat. Where's the cost board? 2 members are local. The rest, get me the 2 who are local this afternoon, she pulled on her coat. We need board-level authorization to freeze any outgoing payments above a threshold until IT completes a full credential audit. If Lane has been inside our systems for 6 months, we don't know what else he's positioned. We need to stop every moving piece while we still can. The board will want an explanation. Then I'll give them one, she said, into terms they can understand. The company is under active financial threat from a party who has had unauthorized access to our systems. That is not a complicated sentence. She was at the door. She stopped. She turned back to Aurelio and she said the thing she had been carrying since the phone call. Lane's signature is on the Meridian protocol, she said, which means 11 years ago he sat in a room with Marcus Webb and Robert Brewer and made a deal, and then he disappeared from the surface. She looked at Aurelio directly. But his name is not on Koss's records in any public-facing capacity, which means he didn't come in through a normal channel. A pause. Did anyone bring him in through you? Any introduction, any referral, any meeting you might have half forgotten from that period? Aurelio was very still. Think carefully, she said. Not a threat. A request made with the specific intensity of a woman who needed every piece of what was real. He thought. She watched his face move through the genuine effort of reaching back 11 years into a period of his life that had clearly become something he preferred not to examine. There was someone, he said slowly, a consultant. We used him briefly in 2013 for a regulatory compliance review. I didn't hire him directly. Marcus brought him in. He paused. I only met him once. He was quiet, extremely competent. He made me uneasy and I didn't examine why. His name, she said. Aurelio looked at her. His name, she said again. He went by V, Aurelio said. I thought it was an affectation. I never got a last name. Marcus handled everything. He paused. He had a way of looking at a document and pointing to exactly the line that mattered. The sentence landed. Serafina stood absolutely still. A way of looking at a document and pointing to exactly the line that mattered. The anonymous phone call from the night before came back to her in full. Look at the document. Look very carefully at who else's name is on it. And the title that had been sitting at the back of her mind since this morning, the moment Priya had described the Meridian Protocol file restricted and waiting assembled itself into its full meaning. The cook, the contract, the line. Aurelio, she said, her voice was very quiet. Who manages the executive kitchen on this floor? He stared at her. What? The kitchen, the staff. Who runs it? A woman, she's been here for 6 years. She oversees catering for the executive floor. He stopped. The strangeness of the question was clearly landing. Her name is Elena. Why? Because the anonymous call I got last night, Serafina said carefully, described someone who knew what was in the Meridian Protocol before I found it. Someone who has been close enough to this company's executive level to know what documents exist and what they mean. She looked at him. Someone who has been inside this building for 6 years, watching, waiting for someone like me to show up. She paused. And when I tried to trace the call Priya checked, it routed through a server address registered to this building's internal network. The silence was total. She called me, Serafina said, from inside this building. She told me to find the protocol. She's been here the whole time, and I think she knows exactly who Victor Lane is. Aurelio stood up so fast his chair moved. Where is Elena right now? Serafina said. Not a question. Executive floor. She would have been here all morning. Take me to her, Serafina said. Right now. They moved. They found Elena in the executive kitchen, and she did not look surprised to see them. That was the first thing Serafina noticed. Not the woman's face, not her age, not her hands, but the absolute absence of surprise in her eyes when Serafina Romano and Aurelio Kozlov walked through that door together with the specific energy of two people who had just figured something out. Elena looked at them the way a person looks at a bus they have been waiting a long time for. Steady, almost relieved. She was 61, maybe 62, small-framed, gray at the temples. She was holding a cloth in both hands, and she set it down on the counter without being asked, and she said before either of them could speak a word, I wondered how long it would take you. Serafina stopped 2 feet from her. You called me last night. I did. From inside this building. From the server room on the 29th floor. I have a friend in IT who owes me more favors than either of us can count. She said it without apology, without drama, just the plain recitation of facts by a woman who had been keeping facts for a very long time. I've been waiting for someone to come in here and actually look, really look, not just shuffle papers and call it a review. How long have you been waiting, Aurelio said. His voice was careful. He was looking at Elena the way a man looks at something he should have seen years ago. 6 years, she said, since the week I started working here and found something in a document I wasn't supposed to be reading. She looked at Serafina. I wasn't snooping. I was delivering a lunch order to the 31st floor, and the room was empty, and the papers were on the table, and the name at the top of the page was a name I already knew. She paused. Victor Lane. The name in this woman's mouth said with that particular weight changed its shape entirely. You know him, Serafina said. I was married to his brother for 11 years, Elena said. His brother's name was Daniel. Daniel Lane. He was a forensic accountant. A good man. A man who found something he wasn't supposed to find inside a company he was auditing and who tried to report it through the right channels and who died in a car accident 14 months later that was never properly investigated. She looked at both of them in turn, and her gaze was not angry, not grieving. It was the look of a woman who had passed through grief and come out the other side into something harder and more durable. The company Daniel was auditing was a logistics firm, a firm that had at that time a significant contract with Koss Enterprises. Aurelio put his hand on the counter. Not for support, just to have something solid under his palm. You came here deliberately, Serafina said. It took me 2 years to get a position on this floor. I'm a very good cook. That helped. The smallest ghost of something moved across Elena's face. I needed to be close to the records, close to the conversations. I needed to understand the full shape of what Daniel had found before I did anything with it, because the first time someone tried to expose Victor Lane, they died. And I am not interested in dying before this is finished. What did Daniel find? Serafina said. Elena looked at her for a long moment, assessing, measuring the look of someone deciding whether the person in front of them has the capacity for what is about to be handed to them. He found the original Meridian Protocol, she said. While the version in your archive, the original. 11 years ago, the document Marcus Webb and Victor Lane created had a fifth signature block, a fifth party. She held Serafina's eyes. That party was a federal official, a man in a regulatory position who had the power to stop any investigation into the billing structures before it started, and whose signature was removed from every copy of the protocol before it was filed, but not before Daniel photographed it. The kitchen was absolutely silent. You have the photograph, Serafina said. I have everything Daniel had, Elena said. He kept copies. He was a forensic accountant. He trusted numbers and he trusted paper, and he trusted nothing else. He gave everything to me 3 weeks before the accident in a fireproof box, and he told me if something happens to me, don't go to the police. Don't go to a lawyer. Wait until the right person walks through a door. She looked directly at Serafina. He said I would know them because they'd be someone who had already been hurt by these people and survived it. Someone with nothing left to protect except the truth. Serafina felt the weight of that sentence settle across her shoulders like something physical. She had been described in many ways over the course of her career. That one was new. That one was going to take a while to put down. I need to see everything, she said, today. I know, Elena said. She reached under the counter and produced a key. Small, ordinary, the kind that opened a locker or a strong box. Storage unit 3 blocks from here, unit 44. It's all there, Siam. She held the key out. I've been carrying this for 6 years. I'm very tired of carrying it. Serafina took the key, and right then her phone rang. It was Callum, she answered. Are you in your car? I'm in my car, and you need to hear this right now. His voice was different, faster, stripped of the careful composure he'd been maintaining all morning. I called the assistant, Brewer's assistant. Brewer left the office 20 minutes ago with 2 men she didn't recognize. He told her to cancel everything for the rest of the week. She said he looked, Callum paused. She said he looked like a man who was running. Where did he go? She doesn't know, but Serafina, she just sent me a file from her personal email. The file she said she'd been keeping. Another pause. It has wire transfer records. 14 separate transfers over 6 years, all routed through the same offshore structure. And the authorization signatures on each one, his voice went very tight. Each one was co-signed by someone at COS, not Aurelio, someone with partial signatory authority on vendor accounts. She looked at Aurelio. He was already looking at her. A name Callum, she said. The name on the authorizations is listed as V. Lane Consulting Liaison. A beat. He had internal signatory authority, Serafina. He wasn't just watching from inside the system. He was a named co-signatory on outgoing payments, which means legally for 6 years, money moved out of this company with his name on it, and someone had to know. Someone had to approve his authorization level, Serafina finished. She kept her eyes on Aurelio. Someone at the executive level of this company approved Victor Lane's access and his signatory authority, and either forgot or chose not to mention it. Aurelio said, Serafina. She said, how did he get in, Aurelio? It was Marcus, Aurelio said. The words came out of him like something he had been holding at great pressure. When Marcus was still here, he brought Laney in as a consulting liaison for the vendor payment system. I signed off on the access because Marcus told me it was a standard arrangement and I trusted him. He stopped. I didn't read the authorization document carefully enough. That is the honest answer. I didn't read it. He said it steadily, and she gave him credit for that, for not dressing it up, for not building an architecture of excuse around it the way a lesser man would have. But credit for honesty didn't change what the honesty revealed. So Marcus embedded Lane inside COS 11 years ago, she said slowly. Lane built signatory access into vendor payments. And for 6 years, money moved. Small enough each time to stay below automatic flags. Large enough in aggregate to be, she stopped. She did the math in her head. How many vendor accounts does COS have in the system? 40, maybe 50 active ones. And if each transfer was sized to stay under the automated threshold? She looked at Callum's file on her phone screen at the 14 transfers Elena's brother-in-law had photographed, knowing these were only the ones Daniel had found, knowing there were certainly more. This isn't $14 million, Aurelio. That number is just what surfaced in one audit by one forensic accountant who then died. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. The real number could be 3 times that, 5 times. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Aurelio said, "What do we do?" And Serafina noticed the shift, the way the question moved toward her, the weight of it, the assumption that had been building since she walked back through those glass doors. She was the one now, not by title, by something more fundamental, by the simple fact that she was the only person in this situation who had no personal history with any of it, except the injury done to her, and that made her the only one with completely clean hands. "We go to that storage unit," she said. "We get everything Daniel left. And then we do not go to the DA's financial crimes unit, and we do not go to the Bar Association, and we do not go to the FBI field office, because every one of those channels is one that Brewer and Lane have had 11 years to compromise." She picked up her coat. "We go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, federal, above the state level, above the channels these men have had time to reach. And we walk in with everything, all at once. Not a complaint, a complete case." "Today," Aurelio said. "Brewer is running," she said, "which means he's either going to a lawyer or going to Lane. Either way, his movement tells us the clock has started. We have hours, not days." She turned to Elena. "Will you come with us in person?" Elena had been standing quietly through all of this, watching with that same steady, patient quality that was, Serafina realized, not passivity at all. It was the composure of someone who had rehearsed this moment so many times in their mind that the actual arrival of it felt almost familiar. "That's why I'm still here," Elena said simply. They moved fast. Aurelio called the 2 local board members and told them an emergency meeting was being convened, no details given over the phone. Serafina texted Priya a single instruction: "Pull the complete vendor payment log, every outgoing transaction over the past 7 years, flag every entry with LMVV, Lane or any variant. Send to my encrypted drive only." Callum was already in his car heading toward the U.S. Attorney's building to request an emergency intake meeting with the duty attorney. The storage unit was exactly as Elena had described. Fireproof box, numbered. Inside 7 years of Daniel Lane's professional precision. Printed wire records annotated in a small, careful hand. Photographs of documents dated and numbered. A handwritten timeline on graph paper, color-coded, cross-referenced. The photograph of the original Meridian Protocol, all 5 signatures. The 5th belonging to a man named Richard Cole, who had been 11 years ago the deputy director of the Regional Financial Regulatory Office. Serafina held that photograph and felt the structure of the whole thing finally become visible to her, the way a building becomes visible when the fog lifts. Webb built the billing model. Brewer gave it legal cover through the protocol. Lane moved the money and provided an embedded financial layer inside COS. And Cole sat in his regulatory office and made sure no investigation ever got past the first phone call. 4 men, 11 years, 1 very careful architecture, and 1 forensic accountant who saw it and photographed it and gave everything to his wife in a fireproof box before someone decided he knew too much. She put the photograph down. She looked at Elena, who was standing at the door of the storage unit watching her read. "He was a good man," Serafina said. "Not a question." "He was the best person I ever knew," Elena said. "And I need what he found to matter. I need it to have meant something that he saw it." "It's going to matter," Serafina said. "I promise you that." She almost never made promises in professional contexts. She had learned in the first years of her career that promises were the most dangerous currency in law. But she made this one, and she meant it the way she had meant very few things in her life, with the full weight of everything she had survived to get to this moment. They were in Aurelio's car heading toward the federal building when her phone rang. "Unknown number," she answered. "Ms. Romano?" The voice was new, male, younger than the previous call. Smooth in the way that people who had been trained to be smooth were smooth, not natural ease, but practiced ease, which was different. My name is unimportant. I represent certain interests who are aware of the steps you've taken today. Then you are going to want to be very careful about what you say next, she said. I want to offer you a resolution, the voice said. Something clean, something that protects you and your client and avoids what could become a very complicated and very public proceeding. A pause. A number, a significant number, in exchange for the contents of a storage unit you visited this afternoon. She felt the air in the car change. Aurelia was watching her face. Elena in the back seat had gone very still. You're watching us, she said. We've been watching you all day, the voice said without any particular heat. Just information offered plainly as a demonstration of capability. I want to be clear that this isn't a threat. This is a genuine offer. Generous. Final. Who is this number coming from, she said. Lane Brewer Cole. She said the last name very deliberately. A silence. Short, but real. She had surprised him with Cole's name, which meant Cole was the piece they were most afraid of, which confirmed that the fifth signature was the one that made the whole structure criminal at the federal level, not just civilly exposed. The offer stands for 2 hours, the voice said. After that, the situation becomes considerably more difficult for everyone. Let me be very clear, she said. Her voice was completely level. There is no number. There is no resolution. There is no conversation to be had. What there is, she paused, is a federal building approximately 6 minutes from where I'm sitting and a fireproof box of evidence in my lap that is about to become the property of the United States Attorney's Office. And after that, it is no longer mine to negotiate with, even if I wanted to. She paused again. Tell Lane I said that specifically. Tell him the window he thinks he has is already closed. She ended the call. The car was silent for 4 full seconds. They know about Cole, Aurelio said. They know I know, she said, which tells me Cole is still connected enough to these men that protecting him is their first priority. She looked ahead, which also tells me he may still be in a position of regulatory influence. If they were calling me to buy the evidence rather than just trying to destroy it, it means they believe formal exposure of Cole would cause more damage than anything else in that box. He could still kill an investigation, Aurelio said slowly, even now, even after 11 years. If he has the right position, then we make sure the U.S. Attorney's Office knows his name before any other agency does, she said, so that when they open this case, the first thing they do is wall him off from any oversight role. She picked up her phone and called Callum. Where are you? Outside the federal building. The duty attorney agreed to an emergency intake. She's waiting. We're 5 minutes out. Tell her we have documentary evidence, a first-hand witness wire transfer records, and the name of a current or recent regulatory official who was party to the original conspiracy. She glanced at Elena in the rearview mirror. And tell her we need whatever she gives us in writing before we hand over a single piece of paper. She's going to want. I know what she's going to want, Serafina said. We negotiate from the door. None of this goes forward without formal witness protection for Elena and immunity consideration for Aurelio as a cooperative witness. She held Aurelio's eye for a moment. Non-negotiable. Done, Callum said. She ended the call. Aurelio said nothing for a moment. Then, you're protecting me. You made mistakes, she said. You didn't make crimes. There's a difference, and I intend to make sure the distinction survives. She looked at him directly. But Aurelio, after this is over, we're going to have a very long conversation about what it means to withhold information from the person you have hired to protect you. And that conversation is going to be uncomfortable. I know, he said. Good. They pulled up to the federal building. Callum was at the entrance, coat open, visibly wired with the kind of energy that only arrived when something enormous was about to happen. He looked at Serafina when she got out of the car, and she saw in his face the same thing she felt in her own chest. Not triumph, not yet, but the sensation of finally moving at the speed the situation had always required. She had the fireproof box under one arm and her briefcase in the other hand. Elena walked beside her. Aurelio fell in behind. The door opened. And then from directly across the street from a black car she had not registered when they pulled up, a door opened too. A man got out. He was perhaps 55. precise, expensive coat, the kind of face that had been unremarkable once and had become through the accumulation of power, something that commanded attention without trying. He stood on the sidewalk and he looked at her from across the width of the street, and he did not call out, did not raise his hand, made no gesture at all. He just looked, and she looked back. And she knew with the specific certainty that sometimes arrived without explanation that she was looking at Victor Lane. He had come himself, in person, which meant the phone call hadn't worked, and he had decided to try something else. Something she couldn't yet name: pressure, intimidation, a final personal attempt to stop what was already in motion. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she turned, walked through the federal building door, and did not look back. Behind her, she heard Elena exhale. Just once, the sound of 6 years releasing. The door closed. They were inside. Callum was already speaking to the receptionist. Serafina set the box on the security desk and produced her identification and said in the steady, clear voice she had built over 15 years of practice in rooms that required her to be the strongest person present. "My name is Serafina Romano. I'm General Counsel for Cost Enterprises. I'm here to present evidence of federal financial conspiracy, wire fraud, and regulatory corruption to the duty attorney. We have an appointment." The woman behind the desk looked at the box, looked at Serafina, picked up her phone. "I'll let her know you're here," she said. Serafina nodded. She did not sit down. She stood both feet on the ground, the fireproof box beside her. 11 years of one man's careful documentation about to become something the people who killed him could not touch or buy or reroute. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. One line. "You have no idea where you are. You just walked into." She read it once. Then she turned her phone face down on the security desk. She had walked into worse. She had walked out of worse. The elevator opened. The duty attorney appeared 40, sharp-eyed, the kind of tired that came from doing important work at serious speed, and she looked at Serafina and extended her hand and said, "Ms. Romano, let's sit down." "Let's," Serafina said, and she walked forward. The duty attorney's name was Claire Okafor, and she had the particular quality of someone who had learned to receive information without letting her face betray what she thought of it, which meant that when she read the first 3 pages of Daniel Lane's documentation, and her expression shifted anyway, just slightly, just at the corners of her eyes, Serafina knew they had exactly what she'd believed they had. They sat in a conference room on the 4th floor. Serafina, Aurelio, Elena, Callum. Okafor across from them, with 2 junior attorneys flanking her, in a legal pad she had filled 2 pages of in the first 20 minutes without looking up once. "The 5th signature," Okafor said. She was looking at the photograph. The original Meridian Protocol, all 5 names visible. "Richard Cole, former Deputy Director of the Regional Financial Regulatory Office," Serafina said. "We believe he may currently hold an advisory position at the federal level. We don't know the specific title. We believe that position is what Lane and Brewer have been leveraging to redirect regulatory inquiries for the past several years." Okafor set the photograph down. She looked at Serafina with the flat, measuring attention of someone deciding how much of what they're hearing they can responsibly believe. "You're telling me a current or former federal official is a named party in a financial conspiracy that spans 11 years, involves wire fraud across multiple entities, and has resulted in at least 1 death that was never properly investigated?" "I'm telling you, that's what the evidence indicates," Serafina said. "The conclusions are yours to draw." Okafor looked at Elena. "You're the widow of Daniel Lane?" "Daniel was my husband's brother," Elena said. "I was his emergency contact after his wife passed. When he gave me the box, he said I was the person he trusted most." She said it without any particular emotion, just the plain statement of a woman who had been carrying a fact for 6 years and was setting it down. He was right. "You've had this documentation for 6 years, and you brought it to a general counsel, rather than law enforcement," Okafor said, not accusatory, genuinely trying to understand the architecture of decision. "The first investigator who looked at Daniel's accident was Richard Cole's former college roommate," Elena said. "I found that out 8 months after Daniel died. After that, I stopped trusting channels." She looked at Okafor steadily. "I needed someone who was going to come at this from outside the existing structure, someone these men hadn't already reached." She glanced at Serafina. I needed to wait for the right door to open. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at the junior attorney on her left and said in the tone of someone ending a deliberation they had already completed internally, "Get me the deputy AG on the phone and find out Cole's current federal appointment status. Now, please." The junior attorney left the room at speed. Okafor looked back at Serafina. "I need to ask you something directly." "Go ahead." "The man you saw outside on the sidewalk, you believe that was Victor Lane?" "I have no documented confirmation," Serafina said, "but yes, I believe it was." "He didn't approach you? Didn't speak?" "No." "What did you read in that?" Okafor said. Serafina considered the question seriously the way it deserved to be considered. "A man who came to make a decision," she said, "whether to try to stop us physically or let us walk through the door. He decided to let us walk." She paused. "Which tells me he's not operating alone and he needed to consult before escalating. Which tells me there is a chain of decision above him." She looked at Okafor. "Which tells me Richard Cole is not retired." Okafor held her gaze. Then she nodded once slowly, the nod of someone filing a conclusion they intended to act on. "We're going to need all of you available. Today, tonight, potentially through the weekend. I want formal statements from each of you on the record, and I want the original box contents logged into federal evidence before 5 o'clock. She looked at Serafina. "Is there anything else you believe is time-sensitive that you haven't told me yet?" "Robert Brewer left his office with 2 unidentified men approximately 2 hours ago," Serafina said. "His assistant described it as consistent with someone who was running. If he reaches Lane before you have a containment strategy." "We'll deal with Brewer," Okafor said. She stood. "Give me 15 minutes." She left the room. The 4 of them sat in the sudden quiet. Callum exhaled through his nose and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. Aurelio sat very still, looking at the table, and Serafina recognized the expression on his face as the specific reckoning that arrived when a person fully understood the distance between what they had known and what they had let themselves see. Elena folded her hands on the table and looked at nothing in particular. She looked like a woman at the end of a very long walk, not collapsed, not broken, just done with a particular kind of effort and not entirely sure yet what came next. "Elena," Serafina said. She looked up. "You're going to be protected," Serafina said. "From this point forward, I'm going to make sure of it personally, not just institutionally personally." Elena looked at her for a moment. "You sound like Daniel," she said quietly. "He used to say things like that. I'll make sure of it. He meant it too." A pause. "It's nice to hear it again from someone I believe." Serafina felt that land somewhere specific and didn't try to move it along. The junior attorney came back into the room 6 minutes later. He was walking slightly faster than when he had left, which told Serafina everything before he opened his mouth. He leaned down to the empty chair where Okafor had been sitting and wrote 3 words on the legal pad she had left behind. He turned it so Serafina could see. Cole active appointment. She had known it. She had said it. But seeing it written made it settle differently into the specific gravity of confirmed fact. Richard Cole, who had co-signed the Meridian Protocol 11 years ago, who had redirected the investigation into Daniel Lane's death, was currently holding a federal appointment, currently had a position, currently had the reach these men had been relying on. "What position?" she said. The junior attorney, his name badge said Ferris, looked briefly uncertain. "Ms. Okafor will—" "What position?" she said again. The same voice she had used with Aurelio on the phone. Completely level, non-negotiable. Ferris looked at his notepad. "Senior advisor to the Financial Fraud Oversight Task Force," he said. "Appointed 14 months ago." 14 months ago. The same period during which the bar complained about Brewer had been slowing down. The same period during which the DA's Financial Crimes Unit had been, in Serafina's words, to Aurelio, hitting walls. Cole had positioned himself directly above the mechanisms that would have caught him. She looked at Aurelio. He was already looking at her. "He's been running interference from inside the oversight structure," she said. "Not from outside it, from inside. Which means every formal complaint you filed in the past year," Aurelio said slowly, "passed through a filter he controlled." "Or that he could reach," she said. "Yes." Callum made a sound short, controlled the sound of a young attorney recalibrating everything he thought he understood about how institutions functioned. She remembered making that sound herself. She had been 26 years old first year at Mercer and Brewer, and she had learned for the first time that a filing could disappear between the point of submission and the point of review with no explanation anyone was obligated to give. She had gone home that night and sat in her car for 40 minutes before she could make herself go inside. She had thought about that memory many times in the years since. She was thinking about it now because Callum was 29 and sitting in a federal conference room learning the same lesson she had learned, and she wanted to tell him that it didn't break you. The knowledge that the structure was imperfect, that it could be worked from inside by people willing to work it. It didn't break you if you decided very clearly and very deliberately that your response to that knowledge was not despair, but precision. Not louder, more exact. She had made that decision in a parking garage at 26. She was still making it now. Okafor came back in. She sat down. She looked at Serafina and said, "Cole's appointment is being frozen pending review as of 30 minutes from now. The Deputy AG's office is treating this as a federal obstruction matter, which gives us jurisdiction that supersedes any state-level interference." She set her pen down. "We have a federal warrant in process for Brewer. We have a location request out for Marcus Webb. Victor Lane," she paused, "is a more complex matter." "Complex how?" Serafina said. "Victor Lane, legally speaking, is extremely clean on paper. The LMV advisory group is structured through 4 shell entities across 3 jurisdictions. His name appears on authorizations within Cost Enterprises' vendor system, which you've already flagged and revoked, but those are internal records that his attorneys will argue were clerical arrangements, not fraudulent ones." Okafor looked at her steadily. "The Meridian Protocol gives us the conspiracy foundation. Daniel Lane's wire transfer records give us the money movement. But Lane specifically has insulated himself from direct legal signature on the criminal elements. Everything traceable to him directly is technically consultancy." She paused. "He is prepared for exactly this moment. He has been prepared for a very long time." The room absorbed that. "Then we need Brewer," Serafina said. "Brewer is the weakest point. He's running because he's afraid, and people who are afraid make the specific error of trying to negotiate before they understand what the other side actually has. If your people find him before Lane does," she stopped. "Lane is trying to reach Brewer right now. That's why he came to the building today. He came to assess whether we'd actually walk through that door, and when he saw that we had his immediate priority, became getting to Brewer before Brewer could talk to anyone." "You think Lane intends to silence Brewer," Okafor said. "I think Lane intends to manage Brewer," she said carefully. "Whether that means silence a coordinated legal strategy or something else, I don't know, but Brewer is scared enough to tell you things if you find him first and you make him understand what the evidence already shows." She looked at Okafor directly. "He will trade. Brewer has always been a man who understood transaction. Show him what you have, and he will negotiate before he protects loyalty to anyone else." Okafor was quiet for 3 seconds. "You know him well." "I worked for him for 4 years, Serafina said. "I know exactly how he calculates." Another beat. Then Okafor made a decision. Serafina could see it happen, a clean and visible movement from consideration to commitment, and she picked up her phone and made a call and said simply, "Move on Brewer now, whatever it takes. He is a flight risk, and I want him in a room in the next 2 hours." She hung up. She looked at the group. "We're going to need the formal statements now. Starting with Ms. Vasquez." She looked at Elena. "I want yours first if you're willing. Walk me through everything from the beginning. Daniel's original audit, what he found, how he gave you the materials, what you observed in the 6 years at Cost Enterprises. All of it." Elena nodded. She straightened slightly in her chair, and Serafin watched her do it. Watch this 60-something woman who had spent 6 years carrying another person's work through a building full of people who didn't know she was watching them pull herself up to the full height of everything she had endured and begin. "Daniel called me on a Thursday," Elena said. "He said he'd found something in the numbers that didn't belong there. He said, 'Elena, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you has to stay between us until the right moment. Will you promise me that?' And I said yes. And he said, 'There are 4 men who have built a very elegant machine for stealing from people who trusted them. And I have the receipts.'" Serafina looked at her hands on the table. She thought about Margaret Hendricks, 71 years old, calling her because she was the only attorney who ever called back. She thought about the box in the storage unit, 7 years of one man's precision surviving him. She thought about the way Elena had handed her that key, the specific weight of it, the specific exhaustion in her face, the specific particular relief. She thought, this is why you stayed in the law. Not for the wins, for the moments when the evidence survives the people who tried to bury it. Okafor's second attorney came through the door at a pace that made everyone look up. He walked directly to Okafor and leaned down and said something low and fast. Okafor's expression did not change, but her posture did a small controlled tightening that told Serafina the information was significant. "Excuse me one moment," Okafor said, and she stood and went to the corner of the room with her attorney and spoke in a voice too low to hear. Serafina watched their body language. Okafor's shoulders dropped slightly, then pulled back. The attorney's hands moved. Okafor shook her head once short and definitive. She came back to the table. "Robert Brewer," she said, "walked into the FBI's field office 40 minutes ago." She paused. Voluntarily, he asked for an attorney and immediately requested cooperation status. The table went completely still. "He turned himself in," Callum said. "He walked in before we got to him," Okafor said, "which means someone had told him we were moving, or he decided on his own that getting ahead of it was better than being found." She looked at Serafina. "You said he was a man who understood transaction." "He does," Serafina said, and she felt something move in her chest, not satisfaction exactly, but the sensation of a structure finally behaving according to its own logic. Brewer had read the situation, calculated his best position, and acted. He had always been selfish enough to be predictable. "What's he offering?" "We don't know yet. The FBI is with him now." Okafor sat back down. "What I can tell you is that his voluntary appearance changes the timeline considerably. If Brewer talks, and I believe he will talk, we will have direct testimony from a named party to the Meridian Protocol before end of business today." "Lane will know within the hour," Serafina said. "Yes. Then Lane is either going to run or he's going to do something that forces your hand," she said. "He cannot stay still. His entire structure depends on the silence of the people around him, and that silence is ending in real time." She looked at Okafor. "The offshore account that activated 2 days ago, do you have the jurisdiction to freeze it?" "In process," Okafor said. "Through the Deputy AG's office. It will take—" She looked at her watch. "Possibly 3 more hours. Then in 3 hours he knows the account is frozen, Brewer is talking, and every access credential he had inside CAS has been revoked." Serafina calculated. "He's going to move the money in the account before the freeze hits. Whatever's in that account right now, he will attempt to move in the next 3 hours." "We're monitoring it," Okafor said. "Monitoring isn't enough. You need to trace where it goes when it moves, because where it goes will give you the final shell entity, the one that's actually his, the one his real identity attaches to." She paused. "That's how you get him. Not the Meridian Protocol, not the cause access, the money itself moving in real time traced to him." Okafor looked at her for a long moment, the look of one professional recognizing another, working at their best speed. "You've thought about this longer than today," she said. "I've thought about the shape of what men like this do when they're cornered," Serafina said. "They move money. They always move money. Because everything else names documents, positions can be complicated in court. But money that moves to an account you own is very hard to explain to a jury." Okafor picked up her phone again. While she made the call, Aurelio leaned close to Serafina and said quietly, "Are you all right?" She looked at him. The question was so simple and so direct that it took her a moment to actually answer it honestly. "Ask me in 6 hours," she said. He nodded. He did not push. That was still one of the things she valued most about him. The man knew when language was insufficient, and he did not try to fill the gap with noise. Her own phone buzzed. "Priya," she answered. "Miss Romano." Priya's voice was careful in the way that meant something had happened. "I have the bus vendor payment log you requested. 7 years. I flagged every LM and Laney entry." A pause. "There are 63 of them. 49 more than Daniel had found." "How much in total?" Serafina said. Her voice was steady. She heard Priya doing the calculation. then 61,400,000 and some change. $61 million dollars moved through a company's vendor system over 7 years in increments sized to stay invisible, co-authorized by a man whose access had been approved in a document that nobody had read carefully enough. "Send it to my encrypted drive," she said. "And Priya, you've done extraordinary work today. Go home after this. Take tomorrow off." "I mean it. I'll take Friday," Priya said. "There's too much to do tomorrow." Serafina almost smiled. "Fine, Friday." She looked at the room around her. Okafor on the phone. Elena giving her statement to the second attorney, steady and precise, 6 years of observation delivered with the specificity of someone who had been preparing testimony in their mind for a very long time. Callum reviewing documents with the focused intensity of a young man who had finally decided what kind of attorney he intended to be. Aurelio beside her, quiet and present. She thought about the conference room at Murder and Brewer that morning, though it felt like a week ago already, and the way she had sat at the head of that table and felt the weight of 2 years of rebuilding behind her, 2 years of pulling herself back from the specific despair of being publicly discarded by people who should have protected her. She had walked back in, she had sat down. She had said what needed to be said, and it had not been enough, as it turned out, because the thing she had gone back for had been smaller than the thing that was actually wrong. She had gone back for Brewer, but Brewer was just a door. Behind it was a corridor, and at the end of the corridor was a room 11 years old, and in that room were 4 men in a financial architecture designed to outlast any single attempt to dismantle it. She had walked through the door and found the corridor and followed it all the way to this table. At 4:47 in the afternoon, Okafor's phone rang. She answered, listened for 20 seconds, said 3 words, "Ikwa, freeze it now," and hung up. She looked at Serafina. "The offshore account moved," she said. 40 minutes ago, $11 million transferred in 3 tranches to a final destination account." She paused. "The destination account is registered to an individual, not a shell entity, not a consultancy." She picked up her pen. "The name on the account is Victor Lane." He had panicked. He had moved too fast, and he had made the one error that precise, careful, long-prepared people made when they finally felt the walls coming in. He had reached for the thing that was most his, the thing he had built for himself alone, and he had put his real name on it because, at the deepest level, even the most careful men believed they were untouchable. "That's your case," Serafina said. "That's the thread that pulls the whole structure down." Okafor was already on the phone. It took 11 minutes. 11 minutes for the account to be frozen, the transaction flagged as federal evidence, and a warrant for Victor Lane issued out of the Deputy AG's office. 11 minutes for the thing that had existed as architecture for 11 years to begin its collapse from the top. Serafina sat through those 11 minutes without speaking. She looked at the fireproof box on the table beside her. She thought about Daniel Lane, forensic accountant, good man, dead in a car accident that nobody had properly investigated. She thought about what it meant that his work had survived him, that the numbers he had written down in a small, careful hand on printed records had outlasted the people who had tried to stop them from mattering. The numbers always survived. That was the thing about forensic accounting, about law, about the entire discipline of making things a matter of record. The numbers survived. They waited. They did not get tired or afraid or bought. They just sat in a fireproof box and waited for someone willing to carry them into the right room. Okafor ended the last call. She set her phone down. She looked at the group. Victor Lane was taken into federal custody 7 minutes ago. He was at his home address. He did not resist. She looked at Serafina. Robert Brewer has formally agreed to full cooperation in exchange for a recommendation from this office. His attorney confirmed the terms 20 minutes ago. She folded her hands. Richard Cole's federal appointment has been suspended pending investigation. His counsel has been notified. The room was very quiet. Callum let out a long, slow breath. Elena pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at them, and Serafina saw her lips move once soundlessly, something private and necessary, something between herself and a man who had given her a fireproof box and told her to wait for the right door. Aurelio reached across the table and put his hand over Serafina's. Not romantic, not complicated, just the plain human gesture of one person steadying another. She looked down at his hand. She did not move it. She let it be what it was. "It's not finished," Okafor said. "I want to be clear about that. The legal proceedings from this point will take months, possibly years. There will be defense motions. There will be complication. There will be days when it feels like the structure is holding. It is not finished. She looked at Serafina specifically. But the architecture is exposed. And exposed architecture cannot protect the people inside it. I know, Serafina said. I've always known it wouldn't be clean. She looked back at Okafor. I didn't come here for clean. I came here for real. Okafor nodded, and in the nod there was something that might have been in a different context between people who had more time for it, respect. The particular respect of one woman watching another one do what was required without performing it, without decorating it, without asking the room to notice. There's something else, Okafor said. Her voice shifted slightly, not softer, more careful. When we logged at Brewer's formal statement of cooperation, his attorney handed us a secondary document, separate from the Meridian matter. She looked at Serafina steadily. It relates to your termination from Mercer and Brewer 2 years ago. Brewer is prepared to confirm on record that the performance improvement plan issued to you was fabricated in direct response to your billing discrepancy complaint, that the termination was retaliatory, unlawful. The sentence arrived in the room and nobody moved. He's throwing us that in, Callum said, very quietly, almost to himself. His attorney believes it demonstrates the breadth of his cooperation, Okafor said. It may also be, she paused, it may also be that on some level even a man like Robert Brewer understands that some wrongs require naming. Serafina looked at the table, at the fireproof box, at her own hands flat on the surface the way she always pressed them when she needed the world to be solid. 2 years. The box she had carried to the elevator, the weight of it, the moment she had thought, this is not how it ends. It wasn't. Miss Romano, Okafor said. Are you all right? Aurelio's hand was still on hers. Yes, she said, and meant it in a way she hadn't meant it in a very long time. But before she could settle into the weight of what that meant, before any of them could exhale completely, her phone lit up on the table. Not a call, a text, from a number she had never seen before with a message that contained only 7 words. Brewer didn't tell you everything, I did. She stared at it. She looked up at Okafor. Who processed Brewer's intake at the FBI field office? She said. Who was the agent in the room? Okafor frowned. I'd have to check. Check now, Serafina said, because someone just told me Brewer's cooperation was curated, that there's something he left out. She set the phone on the table so Okafor could see the message. And whoever sent this was in that room. The 7 words sat on the screen. The day, which had seemed for 11 minutes to be ending, opened back up. Okafor had the agent's name in 4 minutes. Special Agent Dennis Farrow. 12 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The lead agent who had processed Brewer's voluntary intake. The man who had been in the room when Brewer's attorney handed over the cooperation agreement and the secondary document confirming Serafina's unlawful termination. Okafor read the name off her phone and looked up and said nothing, which was its own answer. You know him, Serafina said. I know of him, Okafor said carefully. He transferred into the field office 14 months ago from a regional assignment. She set the phone down. The same month, Richard Cole received his federal advisory appointment. The sentence didn't need unpacking. Every person at the table understood it simultaneously the way a room full of people understands a sound that shouldn't be there, that cold, immediate collective recognition. Cole placed him, Callum said. We don't know that, Okafor said. The tone of a lawyer, precise, but her eyes were doing something different from her words. We know it's possible, Serafina said. Damn. We know the timing is exact. And we know that someone who was inside that intake room texted me 7 words that told me Brewer's cooperation was selective. She looked at Okafor directly, which means either Farrow is the source of that text, someone trying to help us from inside a compromised position, or someone else in that building knows what Farrow allowed Brewer to omit, and they want us to know too. 2 very different scenarios, Aurelio said. Yes, she said. One means we have an ally we didn't know about. The other means we have a second layer of management operating inside the FBI field office itself. She paused. Either way, Brewer's statement is incomplete. An incomplete cooperation from the one man who can place all 4 parties at the table. It is the single thing that could give Lane's defense attorneys enough air to work with. She looked at Okafor. What did Brewer not tell you? I don't know yet what he omitted. Then we need to find out before his attorneys wall him off completely, Serafina said. Because right now he's in cooperation status and his access to us is still open. In 12 hours, his counsel will have restructured his perimeter and whatever he held back becomes strategically buried. She stood. I need to talk to him. Okafor shook her head. He's in FBI custody. He came in voluntarily. He's in cooperation status, not detention. His attorneys are present. If you call over there right now as the duty attorney managing the federal case he just walked into, and you request a supplemental interview in the next hour, his attorneys will advise him to comply because declining looks like bad faith on a cooperation agreement he signed 40 minutes ago. She held Okafor's gaze. And I want to be in that room. And you are opposing counsel to Brewer on the cause matter. I am general counsel to the entity whose financial records form the core of the evidence against him, she said. I have standing, and more importantly, she paused. I know him. You don't. You will get what his attorneys decide to give you. I will get what he actually knows. She kept her voice even. 30 minutes. That's all I need. Okafor looked at her for a long moment, the specific look of a person performing a genuine internal calculation, not hesitation, not reluctance, but the real and serious work of deciding whether the value of the outcome justified the irregularity of the path. 30 minutes, she said. I'll be in the room. Wouldn't have it any other way, Serafina said. She turned to Aurelio. Stay here with Elena. Keep your phone on. She looked at Callum. You're with me. Callum stood so fast his chair scraped. He had the look of a young man who had spent 2 years in professional paralysis and had finally remembered what his legs were for. They moved. The FBI field office was 11 blocks from the federal building. Okafor's credentials moved them through in under 4 minutes. The conference room where Brewer was being held was on the second floor, and Serafina heard him before she saw him, his voice carrying through the door. The specific cadence of a man performing composure for his attorneys, while terror ran underneath it like a current. She opened the door. Brewer looked up, and the composure broke. Not dramatically, Robert Brewer had too much practice for dramatic breaks. But something went out of his face the moment he saw her, like a light switched off in a back room, and what remained was smaller and older than the man she had faced across the conference table that morning. His lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Scholes, whom Serafina recognized from the defense bar, sharp and expensive, stood immediately. This is highly irregular. My client is... Your client signed a cooperation agreement approximately 90 minutes ago, Serafina said, taking a seat across from Brewer without being invited. Which means right now everything your client says in this room advances his cooperation status. And everything he chooses not to say, she looked directly at Brewer, not at Scholes, is a breach. She set her hands flat on the table. Hello, Robert. Brewer looked at her. He looked the way men looked when the thing they had managed not to think about directly was finally standing in front of them, requiring eye contact. Serafina, he said, you walked in here and you told them things, she said, useful things, true things, and then you stopped. Not because your attorney told you to stop, because there's something specific you decided you weren't going to say. She watched his face. I need to know what it is. Scholes put a hand on Brewer's arm. Robert, you are not obligated. Patricia, he said it quietly. The voice of a man who had made a decision before this conversation started, maybe before he walked through the FBI's door. Maybe in the car moving through the city with 2 men he barely knew, while the world he had built for 30 years crumbled in real time around him. It's all right. Scholes sat back. Her expression said it was not all right, but she was choosing her battles. Brewer looked at Serafina. There's a 6th party, he said. The air changed. The Meridian Protocol has 5 signatures, she said slowly. The version you found has 5, he said. The original, the actual original before Lane had it modified, had 6. He pressed his hands together on the table. The 6th party is not a regulatory official, not a government position. He looked at her steadily. It's an institution, a financial institution, a private equity firm that provided the initial capital structure that made the entire billing model possible. Without their infrastructure, the offshore routing didn't work. Lane needed their accounts to build the first layer. What firm? Serafina said. Brewer said the name, and Serafina understood in the specific way that understanding arrived, sometimes not gradually but all at once, the entire shape of something becoming visible simultaneously, why he had walked into this building voluntarily, why he had moved so fast, why he had offered her termination in the cooperation agreement before anyone asked. The firm Brewer named was one of the largest private equity groups in the Northeast. It had, among its portfolio of investments, a significant ownership stake in 3 companies. One of those companies was a media group that owned several publications. One was a real estate holding entity, and the third one was the parent company of a legal services firm, Mercer and Brewer. Robert Brewer had not just been a participant in the conspiracy, he had been in part a product of it. The firm bearing his name had been capitalized in ways he may or may not have fully understood at the time by the same private equity infrastructure that Victor Lane had used to build the offshore routing layer. He had walked into the FBI because he was afraid of Lane, but he had offered her termination in the agreement because he was trying in the only language available to a man like him to tell her something. To say, I know what was done to you. I know it connects to all of this. I'm giving you the piece that lets you trace it all the way back. You knew, she said, not accusatory, just needing to understand the exact shape of what he had known and when. I knew pieces, he said, not the full architecture. Not until recently. When you filed the bar complaint, when the investigation started moving, Lane came to me directly. First time in years. He told me what the structure actually was, what my firm was sitting inside. He looked at his hands. I had built something inside something I didn't fully understand, and by the time I understood it, I was already in. So you buried the Hendricks refund, she said, and you put me on a performance improvement plan, because Lane told you to contain it. Because I was terrified, he said. He said it plainly without decoration. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm telling you the reason. She looked at him for a long moment. Robert Brewer, 63 years old, silver-haired man who had spent his entire adult life moving through rooms like he owned them, sitting in a federal conference room telling the truth because the alternative had finally become worse than the truth. The private equity firm, she said, is there documentation connecting them directly to the offshore structure? Lane kept everything, Brewer said. He was meticulous about it. I think he kept documentation the way some men keep weapons as insurance. He never trusted any of us completely. A pause. The documentation is in a system only he could access, which means now that he's in custody. His devices are being imaged right now, Okafor said from the corner of the room, where she had been standing so still that Serafina had almost forgotten she was there. She was on her phone. She covered the speaker. The warrant covered all digital assets. If Lane kept records, we will find them. He kept them, Brewer said. I am certain he kept them. A man like Victor doesn't build what he built without a way to ensure that if he went down, everyone went down with him. He looked at Serafina. That's what he's been for 11 years, not just a thief, an architect of mutual destruction. Everyone connected to the protocol understood that the documentation Lane held was the reason you stayed quiet and the reason you stayed in. Mutually assured exposure, Callum said from beside Serafina. It was the first thing he'd said since they entered the room, and he said it with the quiet conviction of a young man who had just connected a principle he'd learned in theory to something he was watching happen in reality. Yes, Brewer said. He looked at Callum, then looked away quickly the way people looked away from things that reflected them too clearly. Which is why Marcus is going to try to deal. The moment he finds out Lane's devices are being imaged, Marcus is going to call whoever will pick up and offer everything he has. Because Marcus understands that Lane's records are the most dangerous thing in existence for every person in the protocol, and the only safety from them is to be already cooperating when they surface. Serafina's phone buzzed. Aurelio. She answered without stepping away. Tell me. Marcus Webb just called me, Aurelio said. His voice was careful, controlled. He says he wants to talk to you, directly. He says he has something that isn't in any document Lane kept. Something verbal, a conversation that happened before the protocol was written that established the terms of the whole arrangement. A pause. He says the person who initiated the structure wasn't Lane, wasn't Webb, wasn't Brewer. A longer pause. He says it was Cole. The room in the FBI building went completely still. Cole initiated it, Serafina said. That's what Marcus says. He says Cole came to Lane with the blueprint 11 years ago. That the regulatory protection wasn't something they added later for safety, It was the foundation. The whole thing was built from the inside out, starting with a federal official who knew exactly which holes existed in the oversight system and designed a financial architecture to move through them. She processed that. The shape of the whole conspiracy reorganized itself in her mind, not four men who had built something and then recruited a regulator to protect it, but one regulator who had designed it from the beginning and recruited four men to execute it. Cole wasn't the fifth signature. Cole was the architect. "Where is Marcus now?" she said. "Parking structure 2 blocks from the federal building. He says he won't go to the FBI. He'll talk to you or he'll talk to nobody." She looked at Okafor. Okafor had heard every word. Her expression was the expression of a lawyer doing extremely fast calculations about procedure, admissibility, and the specific value of a first-hand account of the conspiracy's origin from a named party. "I need 10 minutes with him," Serafina said. "If he's offering testimony." "He's not offering yet. He's positioning. He wants to understand what walking through a door costs before he decides whether to walk." She held Okafor's gaze. "Let me talk to him. I will not make any offers. I will not conduct anything that constitutes a formal interview, and I will bring him back here if he decides to cooperate. But he will not come in on his own, and you know it." Okafor looked at Callum. "You go with her. You are her witness to every word spoken." Callum nodded. They moved again. Out of the FBI building, 2 blocks at a speed that was not quite running into the parking structure where Marcus Webb was sitting in a gray sedan on the second level with the engine off and his hands visible on the steering wheel in the specific posture of a man who had been practicing surrender and hadn't quite finished. Serafina got in the passenger seat. Callum stood outside the window. Webb looked at her. Up close in the compressed space of a car, he looked less like the man who had sat in her reception, performing relaxed confidence, and more like what he actually was, a 60-year-old man who had made a decision 20 years ago that had been eating him ever since, and who had finally run out of the stamina required to pretend otherwise. "You've been busy," he said. "Cole built it," she said. No preamble, no negotiation entry, just the thing she needed confirmed, stated plainly, giving him the chance to deny or affirm. He didn't deny it. "Richard Cole came to Victor in the spring of that year," Webb said. "I was there. It was a dinner, 3 of us. Cole laid out the entire structure on a cocktail napkin, which I always thought was either deeply confident or deeply stupid." He exhaled. He knew exactly where the reporting gaps were. He knew which account structures would stay below automated flags. He knew which types of advisory relationships would make the signatory arrangements look like standard practice. His voice was flat, not unemotional, emptied. He had been watching those gaps for years before he approached us. He was waiting for the right people, people with existing legitimate businesses who could provide the operational cover. "You and Lane," she said, "and eventually Brewer for the legal architecture." He looked forward through the windshield. Cole's name came off the protocol before signing because he said it was necessary for the protection of the arrangement, that his name appearing on any document created legal exposure he couldn't manage. We believed him. He was the one with the regulatory knowledge. We had no framework for evaluating what he told us. "But you understood what you were doing," she said. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "Yes," he said. "I understood what I was doing." She let that sit. She did not fill it. "If I testify to this," he said, "to the origin conversation to Cole as the initiator, what does that mean for my exposure?" "That's a conversation for the U.S. Attorney's Office," she said. "I can't make you representations about your legal position. You need your own attorney in that room." She paused. "What I can tell you is that right now in this hour, Brewer is already cooperating. Lane's devices are being imaged. The offshore account has been frozen, and the final transaction traced to Lane's personal account. The structure is coming apart at every seam simultaneously." She looked at him directly. "The people who walk through the door first receive the best consideration. That is not a promise from me. That is how these proceedings work. And the door is not going to stay open indefinitely." Webb looked at his hands on the steering wheel. "Daniel Lane," he said. The forensic accountant's name in his mouth said with a weight that was specific and heavy. "The accident." "Yes," she said. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to know that I didn't know what Lane was going to do when he found out Daniel had seen the records. I didn't know until afterward, when I understood what had happened." He stopped. I want to tell you that I said something, that I pushed back. But I didn't. I said nothing. Because by that point, I was in deeply enough that saying something meant implicating myself, and I chose myself. He looked at her. I am telling you this not for absolution. I'm telling you because the woman who kept Daniel's records deserves to hear a named person say it plainly. Serafina thought of Elena sitting in the federal conference room. 6 years, a fireproof box. I need what he found to matter. Come inside, she said. Tell them what you just told me. All of it, on record. Webb nodded slowly, the nod of a man who had finished a very long argument with himself and arrived at the only conclusion that was going to let him sleep. He got out of the car. The three of them walked back to the federal building. Webb called his attorney from the sidewalk and said 4 words, "Meet me inside, now." Then he put his phone in his pocket and walked through the door without being asked again. It took the rest of the afternoon and most of the evening. Marcus Webb's testimony about the origin conversation was recorded, signed, and added to the federal case file at 6:43 in the evening. Richard Cole's attorney called Okafor's office at 7:01 to discuss cooperation terms, which Okafor declined in the specific language that meant your client has nothing left to offer that we don't already have. Victor Lane's devices yielded by 8:15 a folder of documentation so comprehensive, so precisely maintained that one of Okafor's junior attorneys described it quietly in the hallway outside the conference room as the most complete self-incriminating archive he had ever seen in 12 years of federal prosecution work. Lane had kept everything. As Brewer had predicted, every wire, every authorization, every communication. The documentation of a man who had spent 11 years ensuring that if the structure ever came down, it came down on everyone equally. What he had not accounted for, the single miscalculation in an otherwise meticulous architecture, was that the person who found it would not be afraid of what it contained, that she would carry it through a federal building door with a clear conscience and put it directly into the hands of people who could use it. At 8:47, Okafor came to find Serafina. She was sitting in the hallway outside the conference room with her jacket over her arm and her shoes off and her feet flat on the floor, a cup of terrible coffee growing cold beside her. She was sitting exactly like herself, she thought, not performing exhaustion, not performing strength, just present, just here in this body, in this building, at the end of this day. Okafor sat beside him, a thing Serafina hadn't expected, not the chair across, not the professional distance, but right beside her 2 women on a hallway bench at the end of something enormous. It's a strong case, Okafor said. The strongest financial conspiracy case I've managed in 9 years in this office. Good, Serafina said. The Bar Association will be receiving a formal referral regarding your termination from Mercer and Brewer, with the cooperation agreement confirmation that it was retaliatory. Okafor paused. You have strong grounds for a civil suit. Significant grounds. I know. Will you pursue it? Serafina looked at her cold coffee. She thought about the answer honestly, the way the question deserved. 2 years ago, she would have said yes immediately with the heat of someone whose wound was still fresh. Tonight, she considered it differently. Not because the wrong was smaller, it wasn't, but because she understood now that the lawsuit, if she filed it, was not the center of what had happened today. It was a footnote. The center was Cole. The center was 11 years of architecture designed to steal from people who trusted it, and the forensic accountant who had seen it, and the woman who had kept his work in the specific chain of events that had required every piece of what Serafina Romano had survived to set into motion. Eventually, she said, not today. Okafor nodded. She seemed to understand that the word eventually in this context was not avoidance, but precision, the answer of a woman who knew the difference between what was urgent and what was important. Elena, Serafina said, full witness protection while the proceedings are active, Okafor said. Federal level. I signed the paperwork 20 minutes ago. Serafina exhaled. Good. She asked me to tell you something, Okafor said, before she left with the protection detail. She paused. She said tell her that Daniel would have liked her. Tell her he had a rule. He only trusted people who read the whole document before they signed anything. She glanced at Serafina. She said you'd know what that meant. Serafina closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Behind her eyelids, a fireproof box. A woman handing her a key with 6 years of exhaustion in her face. A small, careful hand writing numbers down on printed records because numbers were trustworthy and the truth had to live somewhere while the people who carried it waited for the right door. She opened her eyes. "I know what it means," she said. Aurelio found her 20 minutes later. He came down the hallway and sat in the chair Okafor had vacated and said nothing for a moment, which was still one of the things she valued most about him. "How are you?" he said finally. "I'm here," she said. "That's the honest answer right now." "It's enough," he said. She looked at him. "We still have the conversation. The one I promised you, about information and trust and what it means to hire someone to protect you and then protect them from what they need to know." "I know," he said. "I'm ready for it." "Not tonight," she said. "No," he agreed. "Not tonight." Callum came down the hallway at 9:05. He looked younger than he had that morning. Not in a diminished way, but in the way a person looked when they had shed something heavy they had been carrying for too long and the absence of it had returned them to their actual shape. He sat on the floor against the wall across from them, which struck Serafina as exactly the right impulse for a 29-year-old attorney at the end of a day like this one. "What happens now?" he said. "Proceedings," she said. "Months of them. Defense motions, depositions, the full machinery." She looked at him. "It won't be clean or fast. You should understand that going in." "I do," he said. "I'm going in." She looked at him steadily. "I know you are." He looked back at her with the expression of someone who had decided something about the kind of attorney, the kind of person they intended to be from this point forward. She recognized it. She had worn it herself once at 26 in a parking garage in the particular clarity that arrived when you understood the system was imperfect and chose precision over despair. She stood. She put her jacket back on. She picked up the cold coffee, drank the last of it, set the cup down, and stood in the hallway of a federal building at 9:15 in the evening, here with the specific quiet of someone who has done what was required and is allowing themselves just briefly to feel the weight of it. She thought about Margaret Hendricks, 71 years old, a refund coming on Monday, an apology on firm letterhead from someone at that table who actually felt something. She thought about Daniel Lane's careful handwriting on printed records, surviving him by 7 years mattering exactly as much as he had believed it would matter when he pressed it into the hands of the person he trusted most. She thought about the termination letter Robert Brewer had signed with the smile in the box she had carried to the elevator, and the thought she had held onto through 2 years of rebuilding like a handhold on a cliff face. This is not how it ends. It had not ended that way. It had ended or begun to end in the long procedural way that justice actually worked without cinematic neatness, but with the durable weight of documented fact, with Serafina Romano standing in a federal building at 9:15 in the evening, clear-handed and clear-eyed, surrounded by people who had chosen the right side because she had made it possible for them to choose it. She had not come back to burn anything down. She had come back to build something that would outlast the people who had tried to stop her. And she had.